I had stopped touching anyone for almost 6 years. Not out of choice, but out of quiet retreat. After my wife passed, I convinced myself that the body no longer needed what it once craved. Touch became something that belonged to younger people, faster worlds, louder nights. That night, the air was cold enough to make my hands tremble. The clock said 2:17 a.m. I had woken up from a dream that wasn't about love, but about skin. Not faces, not words, just warmth pressed against warmth. It startled me. At 68, I thought desire was supposed to fade like old perfume. Instead, it returned like a scent you can't name but know you've missed. The sheet felt heavier than usual, the fabric brushing against the hair on my arm. That tiny friction made me realize, my body still responded. It wasn't dead, just waiting for permission. I sat up. The house was silent except for the sound of the ceiling fan. I ran my fingers over my chest, the skin dry, but still warm. It almost felt like the pulse of a younger man living underneath. That's when I realized, I had mistaken stillness for peace. What I called acceptance was really neglect. For years, I'd told myself that my body was done wanting. That touch was a chapter already closed. Doctors, magazines, even my friends from church repeated the same polite lie, focus on health, not pleasure. But there, under the thin light of the lamp, my hand resting over my heart, I could feel something undeniable, the quiet ache of being alive. I stood up and walked to the kitchen. The tiles were cold beneath my feet. When I opened the refrigerator, the light was harsh, white, like the world catching me in a secret. I poured a glass of water. My hand brushed the rim, that small, circular contact suddenly felt intimate. Why did that touch matter? Why did something so small carry the weight of memory? I remembered my wife's way of holding the cup, thumb over the edge, pinky resting on the glass. She used to say that warmth travels faster through fingertips than through words. I hadn't thought of that sentence in years. It hit me then, loneliness doesn't begin when people leave, it begins when we stop letting anything touch us. At some point, I had turned my own body into a museum, preserved, silent, and untouchable. Every signal it sent, I classified as symptom, not message. The ache in my shoulder. Age. The pulse at night. Anxiety. The sudden warmth when someone smiled at me. Coincidence. I had rewritten every sign of life into a sign of decline. But that night, the body fought back. Not with pain, but with remembrance. I went back to bed, but couldn't sleep. The sheet, the air, the faint ticking of the clock, everything felt like a conversation waiting to happen. My skin was no longer quiet, it was listening. There was no one else in the room, and yet I felt less alone than I had in years. I realized the body doesn't crave youth, it craves connection. It just wants to be seen, felt, acknowledged. The kind of touch that says, you still belong to life. That's when I realized, my fear wasn't about aging. It was about disappearing from my own senses. The next morning, I opened my laptop and typed, almost shyly, why do older people still need touch? The search results surprised me. Article after article, study after study, all saying what I had refused to believe, touch isn't a luxury of youth. It's a biological language that never stops speaking. At Stanford, behavioral researchers have been studying what they call skin hunger, the body's emotional need for contact. They found that when touch disappears, stress hormones rise sharply, and the immune system weakens. One scientist described it as a kind of starvation you can't see. The body doesn't stop needing connection when hair turns gray. It just grows quieter in asking for it. Another paper from Yale's Center for Emotional Health explored what they called late-life sensory withdrawal. Older adults who no longer hugged, held hands, or even brushed against others reported feeling less purpose in their days. Their cognitive scores declined faster, not because of age, but because of isolation. One researcher said something that stayed with me, the body teaches the mind to stay alive. When you stop touching, you stop teaching it. Reading that, I thought of all the times I had refused a handshake because my hands were cold, or pulled away when a neighbor tried to hug me. I had been feeding my loneliness with discipline, mistaking self-control for strength. Touch, the studies said, doesn't have to be romantic to be vital. A warm palm on a shoulder, a friendly pat, even contact with a pet can release oxytocin, the same hormone that softens heart rate and lowers blood pressure. One behavioral science review article described oxytocin as the quiet regulator of human safety. When it flows, the body remembers trust. When it disappears, vigilance takes over. The paradox is that many of us, as we age, become afraid of being misunderstood. A gentle gesture might be read the wrong way, so we stop offering it. But the data were clear: those who found safe, simple ways to reconnect physically, massage therapy, group exercise, even choir singing, had lower rates of insomnia and depression. The rhythm of voices, the contact of shoulders, reawakened their nervous systems. One experiment from a small aging wellness program in Oregon measured tactile resilience. Participants were asked to place a hand on their own heart for 5 minutes a day while breathing slowly. After 6 weeks, nearly 70% reported feeling calmer and more hopeful. Their blood pressure dropped. Their words shifted from tired to present. It was almost absurdly simple. The body responded to being acknowledged. As I read, I realized how easily we separate health from feeling. We count steps, measure sugar, track blood, yet never measure warmth. And warmth, according to the data, might be the one thing keeping the brain and heart in conversation. Behavioral scientists call this the embodied mind. It's the idea that every emotion lives somewhere under the skin, in muscle, in breath, in pulse. The more we deny that language, the more confused the mind becomes. One study suggested that when seniors participate in small, tactile rituals, grooming a pet, kneading dough, folding clothes slowly, their neural pathways for pleasure and safety stay active. The body, in its quiet way, keeps signaling, "You are still here." I remembered my mother brushing my hair when I was a child. The rhythm, the scent of her lotion, the slow pull of the comb, I hadn't realized it was teaching me something: calm through contact. It took me decades to understand that lesson again. The behavioral data didn't preach, it simply described what I had felt at 2 in the morning, that warmth is information. The skin speaks to the brain the way memory speaks to the heart. Ignore it long enough, and the message becomes pain. Listen again, and it becomes peace. Some experts warn that technology and self-sufficiency are replacing this ancient conversation. Robots can measure vitals, but not transmit care. Connection, one psychologist wrote, cannot be downloaded, it must be felt. I closed the laptop and looked at my hands. The same hands that had built, carried, held, and buried. They were not symbols of age, they were instruments still capable of language. That's when I realized, the night before wasn't an accident. It was the body remembering how to ask for life again. If this story felt familiar, stay with me. In the next part, we'll explore what small, real actions can restore that dialogue between body and mind, and how you can start tonight. Tell me in the comments if you've ever felt your body trying to say something you had forgotten to hear. The following week, I began to test what the researchers had said. Not through grand gestures, but through moments so small I could almost miss them. I called it my touch experiment. No one knew I was doing it. It felt private, not an act of healing, but of listening. The first act was simple: I started opening the curtains before dawn. For years, I had left them closed, claiming the light was too harsh. That morning, I let the early sun fall across the floorboards. I placed my bare feet on the warm stripe of light. The sensation was almost electric, dry skin meeting morning heat. The warmth crept upward, and with it, a pulse of clarity. That's when I realized, my body didn't crave youth, it craved participation. It wanted to be part of the day again. Later, I began to pay attention to textures. The way the towel felt after a shower, or the softness of the bread dough when I pressed my fingers into it. Behavioral psychologists at Stanford once wrote that texture anchors emotion, that the brain remembers meaning through physical sensation. It was true. When I kneaded the dough slowly, I remembered my wife teaching me to bake during our first winter together. The smell of yeast, the flour on our wrists, it returned not as sadness, but as presence. The past wasn't gone, it had form, weight, temperature. I started keeping a small ritual. Each morning, I placed my palm over my chest for a count of 10 breaths. The Oregon program had mentioned this, tactile resilience. At first, it felt foolish. But after a few days, something softened. The rhythm of my heartbeat under my hand steadied my thoughts. I began to sense when I was tense before I even realized I was. The body, it turned out, warned me before the mind could translate. A neighbor's dog became my next teacher. Its fur was coarse, not the silky kind from commercials. But when I scratched behind its ears, it leaned into me, eyes half closed, trusting. That small leaning, that surrender, echoed inside me. A behavioral therapist once said that animals are safe mirrors. They remind us what giving and receiving comfort looks like without judgment. I hadn't realized how much I missed being trusted with warmth. The next act was harder. I joined a community choir. I hadn't sung in public since high school. The first evening, I stood in the back row, hesitant. Then the conductor asked us to place a hand on the shoulder of the person next to us, to feel the vibration of the note travel through the group. When 50 shoulders moved with one breath, it felt like being part of a living organism. The sound didn't just fill the room, it filled the silence I'd been living in. One study from the University of Wisconsin found that synchronized breathing in choirs increases oxytocin and reduces cortisol. I didn't need the data to believe it, I could feel it. For the first time in years, my breath wasn't mine alone. Over the next month, I practiced small forms of re-entry into connection. When the mail carrier arrived, I greeted her instead of waving through the window. Sometimes, her hand brushed mine when she passed the envelope, an ordinary accident that felt almost ceremonial. When I visited the local farmer's market, I chose to hand cash instead of using a card. The brief contact, the exchange of warmth, reminded me that commerce was once also conversation. Then came the memory actions, the bridges between emotion and recollection. One evening, I played an old vinyl record my wife loved, Nina Simone's Wild is the Wind. The first notes were fragile, rough, unpolished. I closed my eyes and felt the vibration travel from the speaker into the air, into my skin. That sound wrapped around me like fabric. I wasn't escaping the present, I was inhabiting it differently. Behavioral scientists call this somatic time travel, when the body revisits emotional memory through sensory cues. It's not nostalgia. It's re-embodiment. The nervous system remembers how safety once felt and rehearses it again. Another evening, I brewed her tea, chamomile with a hint of cinnamon. The smell alone changed the rhythm of the room. Smell, though not my primary channel in this journey, still wove itself into the fabric of touch. When I held the cup, the steam brushed against my face like a whisper. I hadn't realized scent could be a form of contact too. In the weeks that followed, I began to notice the smallest signals of responsiveness, a looseness in my shoulders, a slower heartbeat, a steadier sleep. I wasn't chasing youth, I was reclaiming dialogue. The body was no longer a vessel carrying age, it was a participant in the story. I also learned to redefine intimacy. It wasn't about romance or possession, it was about recognition. The elderly couple who walked their dog every evening, they always walked with their arms slightly touching. Not gripping, not leaning, just aware of each other's presence. That awareness itself was love made visible. I practiced that kind of presence with my own body. When pain came, I stopped resisting it like an enemy. I placed my hand over the sore spot, breathed, and asked silently, "What are you trying to tell me?" Sometimes, the pain eased, sometimes, it didn't. But the hostility faded. Touch became my teacher of boundaries. In behavioral therapy, there's a concept called self-contact regulation. It means using physical gestures, a hand to the chest, arms wrapped around oneself, to anchor emotion when words can't. It seemed small, but on nights when the world felt too distant, I found comfort in that act. The skin became both map and compass. One Sunday, I visited a care home nearby. A friend from church had moved there after a fall. I noticed how the staff gently placed their hands on residents' backs when speaking to them. No rush, no force, just acknowledgement. One nurse told me, "We touch to say, you still exist." That sentence stayed with me. It was the purest form of dignity I had seen, recognition through contact. I offered to help during mealtimes. As I placed plates on tables, I sometimes rested a hand briefly on someone's arm, just enough to say I see you. The smiles that followed were small but unmistakable. It wasn't charity, it was reciprocity. My body was learning generosity again through sensation. Even at home, I began small acts of care that required touch, polishing wood, watering plants by hand instead of using a hose, ironing my shirt slowly. Each task, once mechanical, became an exercise in noticing temperature, pressure, rhythm. These were not chores. They were proof that life still spoke through the fingertips. Months later, I realized something deeper had changed. When I passed mirrors, I no longer flinched at the skin that had softened, the veins that showed. The wrinkles no longer looked like damage, they looked like terrain, the evidence of having felt. Behavioral psychologists often say that self-image is shaped less by how we look and more by how we feel from within. The touch work had shifted that perspective. My body was no longer something I had to manage, it was something I could trust again. The final action came unexpectedly. During a choir rehearsal, a new member, a widow, maybe my age, asked if she could sit beside me. Our arms brushed as we shared the same sheet of music. There was no flirtation, only a quiet recognition that two living beings can share space without fear. In that moment, the years between loss and now collapsed. The pulse in my wrist matched the rhythm of her breath. It wasn't romance, it was re-entry into humanity. Behavioral science might call it resensitization. I called it awakening. The experiment had no chart, no endpoint, no applause. Just evidence, my hands no longer cold, my nights no longer hollow, my body no longer waiting for permission to belong. Each small act had turned into a sentence in a conversation between me and myself. A conversation I hadn't realized I'd been avoiding for years. Touch, I learned, is not just the first sense we develop, it's the last one that leaves us. And maybe that's why, when we stop listening to it, life starts to fade at the edges. By the end of those months, the house didn't feel as empty. Because even in silence, warmth had returned, not from another person, but from within the language of the body itself. The touch experiment had become a way of living. It has been a year since that night, the night my body reminded me it was still alive. I no longer think of that moment as strange or shameful. It was simply honest. The body, even when aged, remains a map of unfinished conversations. It holds what we forget to say. It asks, again and again, to be trusted. Each morning now, I sit by the window with a cup of tea. I let the sunlight touch my hands before I lift the cup. That warmth feels like language, one my body speaks fluently even when words fail. Sometimes, I catch the reflection of my face on the glass. It looks softer. Not because time has stopped, but because I have stopped fighting its direction. Science had told me that touch can lower cortisol and strengthen the immune system. But what it didn't fully explain, what I learned only by living, is that touch also restores identity. It brings the self back into focus. You stop being an observer of your own decline and become a participant in your own continuity. When people ask me how I stay so calm now, I tell them, I learned to treat my body not as a project, but as a companion. It does not need perfection. It needs partnership. Every wrinkle, every pulse, every shiver is a line of dialogue. The mistake we make is assuming that conversation ends at 60, or 70, or whenever the world stops calling us beautiful. But beauty never belonged to youth, it belonged to attention. To notice, to listen, to respond, that is the real definition of vitality. I have come to understand that dignity is not the opposite of desire. It is what allows desire to mature into tenderness. And tenderness, at its core, is just awareness in motion, the quiet recognition that even at 68, 70, 80, the body is still capable of affection, curiosity, and wonder. Now, when I think of aging, I don't see loss. I see translation. The body keeps speaking, we just need to learn its newer accent, slower, softer, deeper. It no longer asks for thrill, only for truth. And truth, I've found, is a form of love. Your body never betrayed you, it just waited for you to listen. If this story touched something inside you, share it with someone who might need to hear it. Leave a comment if you've ever felt your body trying to tell you something you ignored for too long. Subscribe and save this video, not as advice, but as a reminder. The conversation between you and your body is still ongoing. And every heartbeat, even now, is still a vote for life.